In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a young curate is poisoned, and only Miss Marple, a sharp-eyed old lady, can save him. When Mr. Langley falls ill, whispers of arsenic spread, and secrets unravel. A nervous maid, a sneaky gardener, and a mysterious cousin hide dark truths. With her knitting needles and clever mind, Miss Marple sets a trap, catching the culprits in a moonlit garden. Can she piece together the clues, poisoned tonic, a hidden vial and a bruised wrist, to reveal a plot of greed and save a life? Dive into this cosy mystery where every glance matters. Chapter 1. A Quiet Morning in St. Mary Mead. The sun peeked over the hills, painting the village of St. Mary Mead with soft golden light. The little cottages, with their straw roofs and tidy gardens, looked like they belonged in a picture book. Birds chirped in the trees, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves. It was the kind of morning that made you want to sit outside with a cup of tea and just watch the world go by. That's exactly what Miss Jane Marple was doing. She sat in her cosy parlour, her favourite armchair by the window, a steaming cup of tea in her hand. Her knitting needles clicked softly as she worked on a pale blue scarf. But her eyes were busy. They darted from the street outside to the flowers in her garden, always watching, always noticing. Miss Marple was an older lady, with white hair tucked neatly under a lace cap, and a kind smile that hid a very sharp mind. People in St. Mary Mead thought of her as just a sweet old spinster who liked to knit and gossip, but they were wrong. Miss Marple saw things others missed. She noticed the way people walked, the way they talked, or the way they avoided looking at you when they had something to hide. To her, the village was like a big puzzle, and she was very good at putting the pieces together. Her parlour was small but cheerful, with flowery curtains and a crackling fire in the hearth. On the table beside her sat a teapot, a plate of buttery biscuits, and her knitting basket stuffed with colourful yarn. The window gave her a perfect view of High Street, where villagers went about their morning chores. There was Mr. Hodges, the chemist, sweeping the step of his shop. Across the way, Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, was setting out fresh loaves in her window. Everything seemed calm, just like any other day. But Miss Marple knew better. Quiet villages like St. Mary Mead often hid secrets, and she had a knack for sniffing them out. As she sipped her tea, something caught her eye. Young Tommy Pierce, the butcher's boy, pedalled his bicycle down the street so fast his cap nearly flew off. His face was pale, his eyes wide with worry. He skidded to a stop outside Mrs. Clement's cottage and shouted something to her. Miss Marple leaned closer to the window, her knitting forgotten. Tommy's voice carried on the breeze. "Trouble at the vicarage," he yelled before speeding off again, his bike wobbling under him. Miss Marple set her teacup down with a soft clink. Trouble at the vicarage. That was unusual. The vicarage was home to the Reverend Leonard Clement and his wife, Griselda, a lively young woman who always had a smile and a joke. They were kind folks, well liked in the village. If something was wrong, Miss Marple wanted to know what it was. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. A walk to the vicarage would be just the thing, she thought. The fresh air would do her good, and besides, a little visit never hurt anyone. She stepped outside, locking her cottage door behind her. The air smelled of roses and freshly cut grass. Her garden was in full bloom, with pink peonies and yellow daffodils nodding in the breeze. She paused to admire them, but her mind was already turning over Tommy's words. Trouble could mean anything. A broken pipe, a lost dog, or something worse. In a village like St. Mary Mead, it was often something worse. The walk to the vicarage wasn't far. Miss Marple moved slowly, her cane tapping the cobblestone path. She passed the post office, where Mrs. Weatherby was sorting letters, and waved to old Mr. Pye, who was tending his vegetable patch. Everyone greeted her with a smile, but she noticed their eyes flicker with curiosity. News travelled fast in St. Mary Mead, and Tommy's shout had probably reached every ear by now. As she neared the vicarage, she saw Mrs. Clement standing in the garden, her hands wringing her apron. Griselda Clement was younger than her husband, with bright eyes and a habit of saying exactly what she thought. Today, though, she looked worried. Her cheeks were flushed, and her usual cheer was gone. "Oh, Miss Marple," she called, spotting the older woman. "Thank goodness you're here. It's awful, simply awful." Miss Marple tilted her head, her calm voice cutting through Griselda's panic. "Now, my dear, tell me what's happened. Is it the vicar? Is he all right?" "It's not Leonard," Griselda said, her voice shaking. "It's Mr. Langley, our new curate. He's terribly sick. Dr. Haydock is with him now. But it's bad, Miss Marple, really bad." She clutched her apron tighter, her knuckles white. Miss Hume. Marple's mind sharpened. Mr. Langley was new to St. Mary Mead, a quiet young man with a bookish look and a nervous smile. He'd arrived only a month ago to help the vicar with his duties. The villagers had taken to him, though some thought he was a bit shy for a clergyman. "Sick, you say?" Miss Marple asked. "What kind of sick?" Griselda led her inside, talking all the while. "He was fine yesterday, chatting with Leonard about the sermon, but this morning he could barely get out of bed. He's pale as a ghost, sweating, and his stomach's all wrong. Dr. Haydock thinks, oh, I can't even say it." She covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Miss Marple patted her arm gently. There, my dear, let's see for ourselves. Where is Mr. Langley now?" Griselda led her upstairs to the guest room, where the curate stayed. The vicarage was a rambling old house, full of creaky floors and faded wallpaper. The guest room was small, with a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a window overlooking the garden. Mr. Langley lay on the bed, his face grey and his breathing shallow. Dr. Haydock, a sturdy man with a no-nonsense manner, was bending over him, listening to his heart with a stethoscope. "Ah, Miss Marple," Dr. Haydock said, looking up. "Didn't expect you, but I'm glad you're here. You've got a way of seeing things." His voice was gruff, but there was a twinkle in his eye. He respected Miss Marple, even if he didn't always say so. "How is he, Doctor?" Miss Marple asked, stepping closer. She looked at Mr. Langley, noting his clammy skin and the way his hands twitched on the blanket. A glass of water sat on the bedside table, next to a plate with a half-eaten scone and a small bottle labelled Dr. Baxter's Nerve Tonic. A faint smell of almonds hung in the air, though Miss Marple wasn't sure if it came from the scone or something else. "It's not good," Dr. Haydock said, keeping his voice low. "He's weak, his pulse is all over the place, and he's been sick to his stomach. I've seen cases like this before, and I don't like it. Could be food poisoning, but—" He hesitated, glancing at Griselda, who was hovering by the door. "But what, Doctor?" Miss Marple prompted, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. Dr. Haydock leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. Could be poison. Not the kind you get from bad fish, either. Something deliberate. I can't say for sure until I run tests, but I've sent for the hospital in Much Benham to take a look. Griselda gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Poison? Oh no, who would do such a thing? Mr. Langley's the sweetest man. Wouldn't hurt a fly. Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind was racing. Poison was a nasty word, but it wasn't new to her. She'd seen it before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond. People thought poison was a city crime, something for dark alleys and shady characters, but Miss Marple knew better. Poison could slip into a teacup or a scone as easily as a kind word slipped into a conversation. She looked around the room again, her eyes lingering on the scone. It was golden brown, with a pat of butter melting into it, but something about it didn't sit right. Who made Mr. Langley's breakfast? She asked, her voice soft but firm. Griselda blinked, startled. That would be Sarah, our maid. She always bakes the scones. She brought them up this morning, along with his tea and that tonic he takes for his nerves. But Sarah's been with us for years. She'd never do anything to hurt him. Of course not, Miss Marple said, smiling to calm her, but she made a note to talk to Sarah. Maids saw everything in a house like the vicarage, and they often knew more than they let on. She remembered seeing Sarah at the market a few days ago, her face pinched and her hands fidgeting with her basket. Something had been bothering her, but Miss Marple hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now, she wondered, Dr. Haydock straightened up, wiping his hands on a cloth. I've given him something to settle his stomach, but he needs rest. Mrs. Clement, keep everyone out of this room for now. I'll be back after I speak with the hospital. He nodded to Miss Marple and headed downstairs, his heavy footsteps echoing in the hall. Griselda turned to Miss Marple, her eyes pleading. What do we do, Miss Marple? If someone poisoned him, who could it be, and why? Mr. Langley's only been here a month. He hasn't had time to make enemies. Miss Marple patted her hand. Don't worry, my dear. We'll get to the bottom of this. People always leave clues, even when they don't mean to. Now why don't you make some tea? It'll do us all good. Griselda nodded, grateful for something to do, and hurried to the kitchen. Miss Marple stayed in the room a moment longer, her eyes scanning every detail. The glass of water was half full, with a faint smudge on the rim. The scone had a crumbly edge, as if someone had broken it apart. The tonic bottle was nearly empty, its cap loose. She leaned closer, sniffing the air again. That almond smell was stronger near the bottle. It wasn't the sweet scent of marzipan. It was sharper, more chemical. She'd read about poisons in her nephew's detective novels, and that smell reminded her of something dangerous. She stepped to the window, looking out at the vicarage garden. The roses were in full bloom, their petals bright against the green lawn. But something else caught her eye. A man working near the hedge, his back to the house. It was Mr. Finch, the new gardener. He was tall, with a rough beard and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He moved slowly, clipping the hedge with a pair of shears, but his head kept turning towards the vicarage. Miss Marple frowned. Mr. Finch was new too, just like Mr. Langley. New people in St. Mary Mead always brought questions. She made her way downstairs, her cane tapping softly. In the kitchen, Griselda was bustling about, setting a kettle on the stove. Sarah, the maid, was there too, slicing bread at the counter. She was a young woman, barely 20, with dark hair and a quiet way about her. But today her hands shook as she worked, and she kept glancing at the door. "Good morning, Sarah," Miss Marple said kindly, sitting at the kitchen table. "Those scones smell wonderful. Did you make them fresh today?" Sarah jumped, nearly dropping her knife. Yes, Miss Marple," she stammered. "I baked them this morning, like always, for the vicar and Mr. Langley." Her eyes darted away, and Miss Marple noticed a faint mark on her wrist, like a bruise. "They look delicious," Miss Marple said, keeping her voice warm. "Did you bring Mr. Langley's breakfast up yourself?" Sarah nodded, her cheeks flushing. "I did. Just the scone, some tea, and his tonic. He likes it with his breakfast." She turned back to the bread, cutting it with quick, nervous strokes. Miss Marple watched her closely. Sarah was hiding something, but was it guilt or fear? People in trouble often acted the same way, and Miss Marple had seen both kinds. She decided not to push too hard, not yet. Instead, she thanked Griselda for the tea and stepped outside to the garden. Mr. Finch was still there, trimming the hedge. He didn't look up as Miss Marple approached, but she saw his shoulders stiffen. "Good morning, Mr. Finch," she called, her voice bright. "The roses are lovely this year, aren't they?" He grunted, barely glancing at her. "They're all right," he muttered, his shears snipping faster. Miss Marple noticed a small bulge in his pocket, something small and hard, like a vial. She smiled to herself. People thought she was just a nosy old lady, but she saw more than they realized. As she walked back to her cottage, her mind was buzzing. Mr. Langley's illness, the almond smell, Sarah's nerves, Mr. Finch's odd behaviour. It all pointed to something dark. Poison wasn't an accident, not in St. Mary Mead. Someone had a reason, and Miss Marple was determined to find out what it was. She glanced back at the vicarage, its windows glowing in the morning light. Trouble had come to St. Mary Mead, but it wouldn't stay hidden for long. Not with Miss Marple watching. Chapter 2. The Curate's Condition. The vicarage was quiet now, but the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Miss Jane Marple stood in the guest room, her eyes moving slowly over every detail. The room was small, with a narrow bed pushed against the wall, a wooden dresser topped with a cracked mirror, and a single window letting in the late morning light. Mr. Langley, the young curate, lay on the bed, his face pale as the pillow under his head. His breathing was shallow, and his hands twitched on the blanket, as if he were trying to fight something no one could see. Miss Marple's heart ached for him, but her mind was sharp, picking up clues like a magpie, collecting shiny bits. Dr. Haydock was packing his medical bag, his broad shoulders hunched. He was a practical man, not one for dramatics, but his face was grim. "It's worse than I thought," he said, keeping his voice low so Griselda, the vicar's wife, wouldn't hear from the hallway. "His pulse is weak, his stomach's in knots, and he's sweating buckets. I've seen this before, Miss Marple, and it's not just a bad breakfast." Miss Marple nodded, her lips pressed tight. She'd heard the word poison from Dr. Haydock earlier, and it hung in her mind like a dark cloud. Poison wasn't something you tossed around lightly, not in a village like St. Mary Mead, where everyone knew everyone else's business. But Miss Marple had seen enough in her years to know that even the cosiest places could hide ugly secrets. She stepped closer to the bed, her cane tapping softly on the wooden floor. Mr. Langley's eyes were closed, but they fluttered now and then, like he was trapped in a bad dream. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said to Dr. Haydock, her voice calm but firm. "Everything you know." Dr. Haydock glanced at the door, making sure Griselda was out of earshot. "He was fine. Last night," he said. "I saw him at the church meeting, talking with the vicar about the harvest festival. No sign of trouble. Then this morning, Sarah, the maid, found him like this, barely able to sit up, sick as a dog. He said his stomach started hurting after the breakfast, and then it got worse. Nausea, dizziness, the works. I've given him something to calm his stomach, but I'm worried, Miss Marple. If it's poison, we need to act fast." Miss Marple's eyes moved to the bedside table. There was a glass of water half full, with a faint smudge on the rim, like someone had touched it with greasy fingers. Next to it sat a plate with a half-eaten scone, its golden crust crumbling where it had been bitten. A small bottle labelled Dr. Baxter's Nerve Tonic stood nearby, its cap loose and a few drops of cloudy liquid inside. That almond smell she'd noticed earlier was stronger here, sharp and strange, not like the sweet scent of baked goods. It made her think of something she'd read in one of her nephew's detective books, something about poison that smelled like almonds. "What did he eat this morning?" she asked, her voice soft, but her eyes never leaving the table. Griselda, who had just stepped back into the room, answered, her hands twisting her apron. "Just what Sarah brought up, tea, a scone, and his tonic. He takes it every morning for his nerves. He's a bit shy, you know, and the tonic helps him feel steady for his sermons." Her voice shook, and her eyes were wide with worry. "You don't think, oh, Miss Marple, you don't think someone did this on purpose, do you?" Miss Marple gave her a gentle smile, the kind that calmed people down, even when they were falling apart. "Let's not jump to conclusions, my dear, but we'll find out what's wrong. Now tell me about this tonic. Who gave it to him?" Griselda pointed to the bottle. "It's from Dr. Baxter, the physician in Much Benham. Mr. Langley's been taking it since he got here. The chemist, Mr. Hodges, fills the prescription every week. It's just a tonic, nothing harmful." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was turning. Dr. Baxter was well known, a proper doctor who wouldn't make mistakes with medicine. But prescriptions could be tampered with, and bottles could be switched. She made a note to visit Mr. Hodges later. For now, she wanted to see the kitchen where the breakfast was made. "Let's have a word with Sarah," she said, turning to Griselda, "and perhaps take a look at where she prepared the food." Griselda led her downstairs, her footsteps quick and nervous. The vicarage kitchen was warm and cosy, with a big iron stove and a wooden table covered in flour. Pots and pans hung on hooks, and a basket of fresh eggs sat by the sink. Sarah was there, kneading dough for bread, her hands moving fast like she wanted to keep busy. She was a slight girl, with dark hair tucked under a cap and a face that looked too pale for someone so young. When she saw Miss Marple, she froze, her hands still in the dough. "Good morning again, Sarah," Miss Marple said, sitting at the table. Her voice was kind, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "You've had a busy morning, haven't you? Tell me about Mr. Langley's breakfast. You made the scones yourself, I hear." Sarah nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, ma'am. I baked them fresh, like I do every day. Just flour, butter, milk, and a bit of sugar. Nothing fancy. I brought up his tray at 7 with the tea and his tonic bottle. He was reading his Bible when I left. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled, and Miss Marple saw that bruise on her wrist again, peeking out from her sleeve. "Did you pour the tonic for him?" Miss Marple asked, keeping her tone light, like they were chatting about the weather. Sarah shook her head quickly. "No, ma'am. He does that himself. He says he likes to measure it just right. I just put the bottle on the tray, same as always." She looked down at the dough, her fingers digging in harder than they needed to. Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was working fast. Sarah was nervous, and that bruise wasn't from kneading dough. Someone had grabbed her, hard, and Miss Marple wanted to know who. "You're a good girl, Sarah," she said. "I'm sure you did everything just right. Did anyone else come to the kitchen this morning, before you took the tray up?" Sarah hesitated, her eyes flicking to the door. "No one, ma'am. Just me and Mrs. Clement. The vicar was in his study, and Mr. Finch was outside in the garden." Her voice was too quick, like she'd practiced the answer. Miss Marple nodded, letting it go for now. Pushing too hard would only scare the girl, and scared people hid things. She thanked Sarah and Griselda, then stepped outside to clear her head. The vicarage garden was a peaceful spot, with neat rows of roses and a low hedge along the path. Mr. Finch, the gardener, was still there, raking leaves with slow, steady strokes. He didn't look up, but Miss Marple felt his eyes on her when he thought she wasn't watching. She walked closer, her cane sinking into the soft earth. "Good work, Mr. Finch," she called, her voice cheerful. "The garden's looking splendid. You must have a knack for it," he grunted, barely glancing at her. "Just doing my job," he muttered, his hands tightening on the rake. Miss Marple noticed that bulge in his pocket again, small and hard, like a bottle or a vial. She also saw dirt on his boots, not the fresh soil of the garden, but a darker kind, like the kind near the shed where the vicarage kept its tools and supplies. She didn't say anything more, just smiled and turned back toward the vicarage. Her mind was buzzing with questions. Sarah's bruise, Mr. Finch's strange behaviour, the tonic bottle with its odd smell. None of it added up yet, but Miss Marple knew it would. People always left traces, like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, and she was very good at following them. Tick-tick. Inside, Griselda was pouring tea, her hands still shaking. "What do you think, Miss Marple?" she asked. "Is it really poison? Who would do such a thing to poor Mr. Langley?" Miss Marple took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle her thoughts. "We don't know yet, my dear," she said, "but we'll find out. Tell me about Mr. Langley. Has he had any visitors lately? Anyone who seemed out of place?" Griselda frowned, thinking, "Not really. He keeps to himself mostly. Reads a lot. Writes his sermons. The only visitor I can think of was a man who came by last week, asking for him. Said he was a cousin, but Mr. Langley didn't seem happy to see him. They talked in the study for a bit, and then the man left. I didn't catch his name." Miss Marple's ears pricked up. A cousin? That was interesting. Family could be complicated, and complications often led to trouble. What did this man look like? she asked. Tall, dark coat, a bit scruffy, Griselda said. He had a sharp way of talking, like he was used to giving orders. I didn't like him much, to be honest. Miss Marple made a mental note. Tall man in a dark coat didn't sound like anyone from St. Mary Mead. But she'd seen someone like that near the chemist's shop a few days ago, arguing with Mr. Hodges. Could it be the same person? She'd have to find out. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of worry. Dr. Haydock returned with news from the hospital. They'd agreed to test Mr. Langley's blood, but it would take time. In the meantime, he was stable, though still weak. Keep that tonic bottle safe, Dr. Haydock told Griselda. Don't let anyone touch it. If it's poisoned, it's evidence. Miss Marple stayed at the vicarage, helping Griselda keep things calm. The vicar, Leonard, came home from Hofish, a meeting in the next village, his face pale when he heard the news. Poison, he said, shaking his head. In St. Mary Mead, it's unthinkable. But Miss Marple knew it wasn't unthinkable. People were people, whether in a big city or a small village, and people could be cruel when they wanted something badly enough. She thought about Mr. Langley's cousin, the man in the dark coat. She thought about Sarah's bruise and Mr. Finch's nervous glances. And she thought about that tonic bottle with its strange smell and cloudy liquid. As the sun climbed higher, the village began to buzz with gossip. Miss Marple heard it when she stepped outside for some air. Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, was whispering to Mrs. Weatherby at the post office. Poison, they say. Poor Mr. Langley. I bet it's that new gardener. He's always sneaking around, looking shifty. Miss Marple didn't join in, but she listened. Gossip was like a net. It caught all sorts of things, some true, some not. She'd sort through it later. For now, she decided to visit the chemist's shop. Mr. Hodges might know something about that tonic bottle, and if the man in the dark coat had been there, he might have left a clue. She walked slowly down High Street, her cane tapping, her eyes taking in every detail. The way the flowers drooped in the heat, the way Tommy Pierce raced by on his bicycle again, the way Mr. Finch's rake paused when he saw her coming. Chemist's shop was cool and dim, smelling of herbs and soap. Mr. Hodges was behind the counter, a nervous man with glasses that kept slipping down his nose. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice high and shaky. "Terrible business at the vicarage, isn't it?" "Terrible indeed," Miss Marple said, smiling. "I was wondering about Mr. Langley's tonic. You filled the prescription, didn't you?" Mr. Hodges nodded, pushing his glasses up. "Yes, ma'am. Dr. Baxter's nerve tonic, same as always. I checked it myself. Nothing wrong with it when it left my shop." But his hands were fidgeting, and Miss Marple noticed a bead of sweat on his forehead. "Did anyone ask about Mr. A. Langley's tonic?" she asked. "Anyone unusual?" Mr. Hodges hesitated, then shook his head. "No one, ma'am. Just the usual customers." But his eyes darted to the back of the shop, where a curtain hid the storeroom. Miss Marple made a note to come back later, when he wasn't so on edge. As she left the shop, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a picture in her mind. The tonic, the scone, the bruise, the gardener, the cousin, something connected them, and Miss Marple was determined to find out what. She glanced back at the vicarage, its windows gleaming in the sunlight. Mr. Langley was still in danger, and time was running out. But Miss Marple wasn't worried. She'd solved puzzles before, and this one wouldn't beat her, not in St. Mary Mead. Chapter 3. Village Whispers. The sun was high over St. Mary Mead by noon, and the village was buzzing like a beehive. News of Mr. Langley's illness had spread faster than butter on warm toast. Every shop, garden and doorstep hummed with whispers, each villager adding their own twist to the tale. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet step, moved through the chatter like a shadow, listening without seeming to listen. She knew gossip was a messy thing, full of half-truths and wild guesses, but it was also a treasure chest. Somewhere in the tangle of words there was a clue, and she was determined to find it. She walked slowly down High Street, her cane tapping the cobblestones, her lace cap shielding her eyes from the sun. Her parlour, with its cosy fire and knitting basket, felt far away now. The vicarage was still fresh in her mind, the pale face of Mr. Langley, the cloudy tonic bottle, Sarah's nervous hands, and Mr. Finch's sneaky glances. Poison, Dr. Haydock had said, and that word was like a pebble in her shoe, nagging at her with every step. Someone in St. Mary Mead had done this, and Miss Marple was not one to let a puzzle go unsolved. Her first stop was the post office, where the air smelled of ink and paper. Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, was sorting letters behind the counter, her glasses perched on her nose. She was a thin woman with a voice like a sparrow, quick and chirpy, and she loved a good story. Today her eyes were bright with excitement. "Oh, Miss Marple," she called, waving a letter like a flag. "Have you heard? They say Mr. Langley was poisoned. Poisoned! Right here in St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple smiled, settling onto a stool by the counter. "Goodness, Mrs. Weatherby, that's quite a story. Who's saying such things?" Her voice was soft, like she was just making small talk, but her eyes missed nothing. The way Mrs. Weatherby leaned forward, eager to share, the way her fingers clutched the letter a bit too tight. "Everyone's talking about it," Mrs. Weatherby said, lowering her voice to a dramatic whisper. "Mrs. Price was in here an hour ago. Said she heard it from Tommy Pierce, who heard it from the vicarage maid. Poison, they say. And you know who I think did it?" She paused, her eyes gleaming. "That new gardener, Mr. Finch. He's been lurking around the vicarage, always poking about where he shouldn't. I saw him myself, digging near the shed last week, looking sneaky as anything." Miss Marple tilted her head, her knitting needles clicking in her lap. She'd brought her knitting bag along, more for show than anything else. People talked more when they thought you were just a harmless old lady, busy with her scarf. "Mr. Finch, you say? That's interesting. Has he been causing trouble?" Mrs. Weatherby nodded, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Oh, yes. He's not like old Mr. Green, who used to tend the vicarage garden. Mr. Green was friendly, always had a smile. This Mr. Finch barely says a word, and when he does, it's gruff. I don't trust him, Miss Marple, not one bit." Miss Marple made a mental note. Mr. Finch was new to St. Mary Mead, just like Mr. Langley, and new faces always stirred her curiosity. She'd seen him that morning, raking leaves with a stiff back and a pocket that bulged with something small and hard. Could it be poison? Rat poison, maybe, or something worse. She'd have to watch him closer, but for now she kept her face calm. "Well, gossip does grow like weeds, doesn't it?" she said, smiling. Anything else you've heard?" Mrs. Weatherby leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "Well, there's talk about Sarah, too. The vicarage maid. Mrs. Price says she's been acting strange lately, all jumpy and quiet. And you know how maids are. They see everything. In a house, maybe she saw something she shouldn't, or maybe—" She trailed off, raising her eyebrows. Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind was racing. Sarah's bruise, the one she'd tried to hide, flashed in her memory. The girl had been nervous in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she kneaded dough. Was she scared? Or was she hiding something? Miss Marple tucked the thought away. "Thank you, Mrs. Weatherby," she said, standing. "You've been most helpful. I think I'll pop by the vicarage again, see how Mr. Langley's doing." As she left the post office, the village seemed to hum louder. Across the street, Mrs. Price was sweeping the step of her bakery, her apron dusted with flour. A group of women stood nearby, their heads close together, their voices low. Miss Marple caught snippets as she passed. "Poison! Poor curate! Who'd do such a thing?" One woman, Mrs. Carter from the grocer's, glanced at Miss Marple and quickly looked away. They all knew she was listening, but they didn't stop talking. That was the thing about St. Mary Mead. Everyone had an opinion, and no one could keep it to themselves. Miss Marple decided to visit the vicarage again. The walk was short, but it gave her time to think. The gossip about Mr. Finch was interesting, but gossip was like a foggy mirror, hard to see the truth through it. Still, his name kept coming up, and that meant something. She thought about Sarah, too, and the man in the dark coat Griselda had mentioned, the cousin who'd visited Mr. Langley. Family could be tricky, especially when money or secrets were involved. Miss Marple had seen it before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond. A cousin might have a reason to want a curate out of the way, but why? She needed more pieces to the puzzle. At the vicarage, Griselda was in the parlour, pacing like a cat in a cage. Her face was pale and her hands twisted her apron into knots. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, rushing over. "You're back. Dr. Haydock just left. He says Mr. Langley's holding on, but it's still bad. He's waiting for the hospital to test the blood, but he's sure it's poison now. Arsenic, he thinks. Can you believe it?" Miss Marple patted her arm, her touch gentle, but her eyes sharp. "Arsenic is a nasty thing," she said, "but we'll sort it out, my dear. Now, let's have a chat with Sarah again. I'd like to see the kitchen too, if you don't mind." Griselda nodded, leading her to the kitchen. Sarah was there, scrubbing pots with a vigour that seemed more about nerves than cleanliness. Her dark hair was coming loose from her cap, and her face was flushed. When she saw Miss Marple, she froze, her hands dripping soapy water. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice small, Is Mr. Langley any better?" "He's fighting," Miss Marple said kindly, sitting at the kitchen table. The room smelled of bread and soap, with a faint hint of the scones Sarah had baked that morning. A tray of fresh ones sat on the counter, golden and tempting, but Miss Marple's eyes were on Sarah. "You've had a hard morning, haven't you? Tell me, Sarah, did you notice anything odd when you made Mr. Langley's breakfast? Anything at all?" Sarah shook her head, her eyes fixed on the pot she was scrubbing. "No, ma'am. I made the scones like always. Flour, butter, milk, a pinch of sugar. The tea was from the tin, and the tonic was his own bottle. I didn't touch it, just put it on the tray." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook, and that bruise on her wrist caught the light again. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft as a whisper. "Sarah, my dear, you look worried. If something's troubling you, you can tell me. No one's blaming you, but if you saw something or someone, it might help Mr. Langley." Sarah's eyes flicked up, wide and scared, but she shook her head again. "I didn't see anything, Miss Marple. Honest, I just want Mr. Langley to be okay." Her voice cracked, and she turned back to the pot, scrubbing harder. Miss Marple sat back, her knitting needles clicking softly. She didn't believe Sarah was lying, not exactly, but the girl was holding something back. That bruise wasn't from an accident, and her nerves weren't just about the curate's illness. Someone had scared her, maybe even threatened her. Miss Marple thought of the man in the dark coat. Could he have been in the kitchen? Or was it Mr. Finch, with his sneaky glances and that bulge in his pocket? She thanked Sarah and Griselda, then stepped outside to the garden. Mr. Finch was there, as she'd expected, trimming the roses with a pair of sharp shears. His cap was pulled low, hiding his eyes, but Miss Marple saw the way his hands tightened when she approached. "Good afternoon, Mr. Finch," she called, her voice bright. "You've got those roses looking lovely. Been working here long today?" He grunted, not looking up. "Since dawn," he said, his voice rough. "Lots to do." His shears snipped a rose too close, and the flower fell to the ground. Miss Marple noticed his boots again, caked with dark soil, not the sandy earth of the garden, but something heavier, like the mud near the shed. "That's a lot of work," she said, smiling. "Do you ever go inside the vicarage? To fetch water, maybe, or tools?" His head jerked up, and for a moment his eyes met hers. They were hard, like stones, but they flicked away quickly. "No need," he said. "I keep my tools in the shed. Don't bother the housefolk." He turned back to the roses, his movements quick and jerky. Miss Marple nodded, her smile never fading. She didn't believe him. The shed was near the kitchen door, and someone could slip inside without being noticed, especially early in the morning. She made a note to check the shed later, when Mr. Finch wasn't around. For now, she wandered back toward the village, her mind turning over what she'd learned. The gossip at the post office, Sarah's bruise, Mr. Finch's odd behaviour. It was all starting to weave together, but the pattern wasn't clear yet. She thought about the tonic bottle, with its cloudy liquid and almond smell. Arsenic, Dr. Haydock had said. Arsenic was easy to get. Rat poison, sold at any shop, could do the trick. She remembered Mrs. Weatherby's words about Mr. Finch digging near the shed. Could he have hidden something there? Or was Sarah's fear the key? She stopped at the village shop, where Mrs. Carter was stacking cans of beans. The shop was small, with shelves crammed full of everything from sugar to soap. Mrs. Carter was a stout woman with a loud voice, and she loved to talk. "Miss Marple," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Terrible about the curate, isn't it? They're saying it's poison. I told my husband it's that gardener. He bought rat poison here last week, said it was for the vicarage garden. But who needs that much poison for a few rats?" Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her face calm. "Rat poison, you say? That's interesting. Did Mr. Finch say anything else?" Mrs. Carter shook her head. "Not much. Just paid and left. But he looked nervous, kept looking over his shoulder. I don't trust him, Miss Marple. Not one bit. Miss Marple thanked her and bought a packet of tea, her mind racing. Rat poison could explain the arsenic, and Mr. Finch's nervous glances didn't help his case. But why would a gardener poison a curate he barely knew? And what about Sarah's bruise? Was she caught in the middle, or was she part of it? As she walked home, the village seemed quieter now, the gossip fading with the afternoon light, but Miss Marple's mind was far from quiet. She thought of Mr. Langley's cousin, the man in the dark coat. She thought of the shed, with its dark soil and hidden secrets. And she thought of Sarah, her hands shaking, her eyes full of fear. The puzzle was taking shape, but it wasn't complete. Not yet. She reached her cottage, the roses in her garden nodding in the breeze. Inside, she set her knitting bag down and poured a fresh cup of tea. The parlour was warm, the fire crackling, but her thoughts were cold and clear. Someone in St. Mary Mead had poisoned Mr. Langley, and they'd left clues, small ones, but enough. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her knitting needles clicking softly. She'd find those clues, and she'd put them together. She always did. Chapter 4. The Gardener's Secret. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village's tidy streets. Miss Jane Marple walked slowly, her cane tapping the cobblestones, her mind buzzing like a beehive. The gossip from the post office and the village shop still rang in her ears. Mr. Finch, the new gardener, was at the centre of it all. His name kept popping up, like a weed you couldn't pull out, and Miss Marple didn't believe in coincidences. If people were talking about Mr. Finch, there was a reason, and she meant to find it. Her morning at the vicarage had left her with more questions than answers. Mr. Langley, the young curate, was still clinging to life, his face pale and his breathing weak. Dr. Haydock was sure it was arsenic poisoning, and the cloudy tonic bottle on the bedside table was the likely culprit. Sarah, the maid, was hiding something, her bruised wrist and nervous glances telling a story she wouldn't share. And then there was Mr. Finch, with his gruff voice and that mysterious bulge in his pocket. Miss Marple's sharp eyes had caught it all, and now she was headed back to the vicarage to take a closer look at the gardener. The vicarage garden was a peaceful spot, with roses blooming in neat rows and a low hedge lining the path. Miss Marple found Mr. Finch near the shed, a small wooden building tucked behind the roses. He was pruning a bush, his shears snipping with quick, sharp strokes. His cap was pulled low, hiding his eyes, but Miss Marple saw the way his shoulders stiffened when she approached. He knew she was watching, and that made him interesting. "Good afternoon, Mr. Finch," she called, her voice as bright as the sunshine. She leaned on her cane, her knitting bag swinging gently from her arm. "You've got this garden looking splendid. Those roses are a treat to see." Mr. Finch grunted, barely glancing up. "Just doing my work," he muttered, his hands moving faster. A thorn caught his finger, and he winced, but he didn't stop. Miss Marple noticed his boots again, caked with dark, heavy soil, not the sandy earth of the garden. It was the kind of mud you'd find near the shed, where the ground was damp and shaded. "You must spend a lot of time here," she said, stepping closer. "Do you ever go near the vicarage kitchen? To fetch water for the plants, maybe?" His head jerked up, and for a moment his eyes met hers. They were narrow and hard, like a cornered animal's. "No need," he said quickly. "Got a tap by the shed. Don't bother the house folk." His hand slipped into his pocket, and Miss Marple saw that bulge again. Small, hard, like a glass vial. Her heart quickened, but her face stayed calm, her smile as sweet as ever. "The course," she said, nodding. "You're a busy man, I'm sure. Do you keep your tools in the shed? It looks like a handy spot." He shrugged, turning back to the bush. "Aye, tools stay there. Don't need much else." His voice was gruff, and his shears snipped faster, cutting leaves that didn't need cutting. Miss Marple watched his pocket, her mind racing. A vial could hold anything, rat poison maybe, or something worse. Mrs. Carter at the shop had said Mr. Finch bought rat poison last week, and rat poison could have arsenic. Was he the one who tampered with Mr. Langley's tonic? And if so, why? She didn't push him further. People like Mr. Finch clammed up when you pressed too hard, and she wanted him to think she was just a nosy old lady, not a threat. "Well, keep up the good work," she said, smiling. "I'll let you get back to it." She turned away, her cane tapping as she walked toward the vicarage, but her eyes lingered on the shed. It was small, with a rusty lock, and a window so dirty you couldn't see through it. If Mr. Finch was hiding something, that's where it would be. Inside the vicarage, Griselda was in the parlour, her hands twisting her apron. The room smelled of wax polish and tea, with sunlight streaming through the windows. "Miss Marple," Griselda said, her voice shaky. "Any news? Dr. Haydock called from the hospital. They're still testing Mr. Langley's blood, but he's sure it's arsenic. He's stable, thank goodness, but he's not out of danger yet." Miss Marple patted her arm, her touch gentle, but her mind sharp. "We'll get to the bottom of this, my dear. Have you seen anyone near the shed lately? Mr. Finch, perhaps, or someone else?" Griselda frowned, thinking, "Just Mr. Finch mostly. He's always out there, digging or pruning. But yesterday I saw a man near the shed, tall, in a dark coat. I thought he was a deliveryman, but he didn't come to the door. He just stood there, looking at the house, then left." Miss Marple's ears pricked up. The man in the dark coat again. The one Griselda had called Mr. Langley's cousin. He'd been at the vicarage last week, and now near the shed. That was no coincidence. "Did you see where he went?" she asked. Griselda shook her head. "He walked toward the village, down the lane. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now—" Her voice trailed off, her eyes wide with worry. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the new clue. The man in the dark coat was becoming a key piece of the puzzle, but she needed more. She decided to check the kitchen again to see if Sarah had remembered anything new. The maid was there, peeling potatoes with quick, nervous strokes. Her face was pale, and that bruise on her wrist stood out like a dark smudge. "Hello, Sarah," Miss Marple said, sitting at the table. Her knitting needles clicked softly, a soothing sound that made people relax. "You're working hard, I see. I was wondering about the shed outside. Do you ever go there? To fetch tools for the kitchen, maybe?" Sarah's knife slipped, nicking the potato. "The shed?" she said, her voice high. "No, ma'am. That's Mr. Finch's place. I don't go near it." Her eyes darted to the window, where the shed was just visible through the roses. Miss Marple smiled, her voice gentle. "Of course, my dear. But you see a lot in this house, don't you? If someone was near the shed or in the kitchen, you'd notice. Did anyone come by yesterday? Someone who didn't belong?" Sarah's hands shook, and she dropped the potato into the bowl. "No one, ma'am," she said quickly. "Just the usual. Mrs. Clement, the vicar, Mr. Finch, outside. No one else." But her eyes told a different story, full of fear, and Miss Marple knew she was hiding something. "I see," Miss Marple said, her smile never fading. "Well, you're a good girl, Sarah. If you remember anything, you'll tell me, won't you?" Sarah nodded, but she didn't meet Miss Marple's eyes, and that bruise seemed darker now, like a warning. Miss Marple left the kitchen, her mind buzzing. Sarah was scared, and scared people didn't lie well. The bruise, the man in the dark coat, Mr. Finch's vial. It was all connected. But how? She decided to take a closer look at the shed, but she'd have to be careful. Mr. Finch was watching, and he wasn't the only one. As she stepped outside, she saw Tommy Pierce, the butcher's boy, pedalling by on his bicycle. He waved, but his face was serious, not his usual grin. Even the children felt the village's unease. The shed was at the edge of the garden, half hidden by the roses. Miss Marple walked slowly, pretending to admire the flowers. The shed's door was closed, the rusty lock hanging loose. The window was too dirty to see through, but she noticed fresh footprints in the mud. Big ones like a man's boots, and smaller ones too, like a woman's shoes. Her heart quickened. Sarah had said she never went to the shed, so whose footprints were those? She glanced back at the garden. Mr. Finch was gone, his tools left by the hedge. Now was her chance. She moved to the shed door, her cane steadying her. The lock was old, and with a gentle push, the door creaked open. Inside, the air was damp and musty, smelling of earth and oil. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with gardening tools, pots, and bags of fertilizer. A small table sat in the corner, covered with a dusty cloth. Miss Marple stepped inside, her eyes scanning every inch. Under the table she saw a box, half hidden by a sack of soil. She knelt, her knees creaking, and pulled it out. It was a wooden box, no bigger than a book, with a simple latch. She opened it carefully, her fingers steady despite her racing heart. Inside was a small glass vial, just like the one she'd seen in Mr. Finch's pocket. It was empty, but the label read, "Rat poison arsenic." Her breath caught. This was no coincidence. She tucked the vial into her knitting bag, careful not to touch it with her bare hands. Evidence like this needed to go to Dr. Haydock, but first she wanted to know more. She closed the box and pushed it back under the table, making sure everything looked untouched. As she stood, she heard a noise outside, a rustle like someone stepping through the roses. She froze, her heart thumping, but no one appeared. Still, she felt watched. She left the shed, closing the door behind her. The garden was quiet now, the sun dipping lower, casting golden light over the roses. Mr. Finch was back, raking leaves at the far end of the garden, but his eyes flicked toward her. Miss Marple smiled and waved, as if she'd just been admiring the flowers. He didn't wave back. Back at the vicarage, she found Griselda in the parlour, pouring tea. "Miss Marple, you look thoughtful," Griselda said, her voice shaky. "Have you found something?" "Not yet, my dear," Miss Marple said, sitting down. She didn't mention the vial. Not yet. She needed to be sure before she shared it. "But I was thinking about Mr. Langley's cousin, the man in the dark coat. Did Mr. Langley ever talk about him?" Griselda frowned, setting the teapot down. "Not much. He said they weren't close. The cousin, Harold, I think his name was, came by last week, asking for money. Mr. Langley said no, and they argued. I didn't hear much, but it sounded heated." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning. Money was a powerful reason to hurt someone, and a cousin who argued with Mr. Langley might have a grudge. She thought of the man in the dark coat near the shed, and the vial in the shed. Was Harold working with Mr. Finch? Or was Sarah involved, her bruise a sign of something darker? She sipped her tea, her knitting needles clicking softly. The village was quiet now, the gossip settling as the day faded. But Miss Marple's mind was anything but quiet. She thought of the vial, the footprints, Sarah's fear, and Mr. Finch's hard eyes. The puzzle was coming together, piece by piece, but it wasn't complete. Not yet. She decided to visit the village shop again before heading home. Mrs. Carter was there, stacking jars of jam. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice loud, "still poking about? I heard Mr. Langley's know better. They say it's definitely poison now. I told you, it's that gardener. Bought enough rat poison to kill 100 rats. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "Did he now? Did anyone else buy rat poison recently? Or anything unusual?" Carter thought for a moment, her brow furrowing. "Well, there was that man in the dark coat, come to think of it. He came in a few days ago, asking for cleaning supplies. But he looked at the poisons, too. Didn't buy any, though. Said he was just passing through." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter," she said, buying a small tin of biscuits. As she walked home, the pieces were falling into place. The man in the dark coat, Harold, the cousin, had been near the shed, near the shop, near the vicarage. Mr. Finch had the vial, and Sarah was scared. Someone had poisoned Mr. Langley, and they were still in St. Mary Mead, thinking they'd gotten away with it. She reached her cottage, the roses glowing in the evening light. Inside, she set her knitting bag down, the vial carefully tucked inside. She'd show it to Dr. Haydock tomorrow, but for now she needed to think. She poured a fresh cup of tea, the fire crackling in her parlour. The puzzle wasn't solved, but it was clearer now. Someone wanted Mr. Langley dead, and they'd left clues, small ones but enough. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she thought. She'd find the truth, just like she always did. Chapter 5. A Clue in the Tonic. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over St. Mary Mead, turning the village's cottages into golden patches against the green hills. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, her knitting needles clicking softly, but her mind was far from the pale blue scarf in her lap. The events at the vicarage weighed heavy on her thoughts. Mr. Langley's pale face, Sarah's nervous hands, Mr. Finch's sneaky glances, and the mysterious man in the dark coat. The vial of rat poison she'd found in the shed was tucked safely in her knitting bag, wrapped in a handkerchief. It was a dangerous clue, one that pointed to arsenic, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. She needed to know how the poison got to Mr. Langley, and her sharp eyes kept returning to the cloudy tonic bottle on his bedside table. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands. The village was buzzing with gossip, each whisper adding a new twist to the story of the curate's illness. Some said it was bad luck. Others blamed the gardener, Mr. Finch, and a few even whispered about Sarah, the maid. But Miss Marple knew. Gossip was like a tangled ball of yarn. You had to pull it apart carefully to find the truth. She set her cup down and decided to return to the vicarage. The tonic bottle was the key. She was sure of it, and she needed to see it again. The walk to the vicarage was short, her cane tapping the cobblestone path. The air smelled of roses and fresh bread, and the village seemed peaceful, but Miss Marple felt the tension underneath. People nodded as she passed, their smiles tight, their eyes curious. News of Mr. Langley's poisoning had spread like wildfire, and everyone was watching, waiting for answers. She passed the post office, where Mrs. Weatherby was sweeping the step, and the bakery, where Mrs. Price was arranging scones in the window. Their whispers followed her, but Miss Marple kept her face calm, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side. At the vicarage, Griselda met her at the door, her face pale, and her hands twisting her apron. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice shaky. "You're back. Dr. Haydock was just here. He says Mr. Langley's no worse, but no better either. The hospital confirmed it's arsenic, just like he thought. They're treating him, but it's slow. Who would do such a thing?" Miss Marple patted her arm, her touch gentle but her eyes sharp. "We'll find out, my dear. May I see Mr. Langley's room again? I'd like to take another look at that tonic bottle." Griselda nodded, leading her upstairs. The guest room was as she'd left it, small and plain, with a narrow bed and a dusty dresser. Mr. Langley lay still, his breathing shallow, his face grey against the pillow. The bedside table held the glass of water, the half-eaten scone, and the tonic bottle, its label reading, "Dr. Baxter's Nerve Tonic." Miss Marple leaned closer, careful not to touch anything. The liquid inside was cloudy, not clear like the tonics she'd seen at the chemist's shop. That almond smell was still there, sharp and wrong, like something from a chemistry set, not a medicine bottle. She turned to Griselda, her voice soft. "Has anyone touched this bottle since this morning?" Griselda shook her head. "No, ma'am. Dr. Haydock told us to leave it alone. He says it's evidence, and he's sending it to the hospital for testing." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The bottle was the key, but how had the arsenic gotten into it? Dr. Baxter was a careful doctor, and Mr. Hodges, the chemist, swore he'd checked the prescription. Someone had tampered with it, either at the shop or here at the vicarage. She thought of Sarah, who brought the bottle to Mr. Langley's tray, and Mr. Finch, who was always near the kitchen door. And then there was the man in the dark coat, Harold, the cousin, who'd been seen near the shed and the shop. "Let's talk to Sarah again," Miss Marple said, turning to Griselda, "and perhaps have a look at the kitchen." Griselda led her downstairs, her footsteps quick and nervous. The kitchen was warm, with the smell of fresh bread and soap. Sarah was at the sink, washing dishes, her hands moving fast, like she wanted to keep busy. Her dark hair was tucked under her cap, but a few strands hung loose, and her face was pale. That bruise on her wrist was darker now, a purple mark that stood out against her skin. When she saw Miss Marple, she froze, a plate dripping in her hands. "Hello, Sarah," Miss Marple said, sitting at the table. Her knitting needles clicked softly, a comforting sound that made people let their guard down. "You've had a tough day, haven't you? I was wondering about Mr. Langley's tonic. You put it on his tray every morning, don't you?" Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the plate. "Yes, ma'am. I just take it from the shelf and put it on the tray. He pours it himself, says he likes to measure it just right." Her voice was quiet, but her hands shook, and Miss Marple saw fear in her eyes. "Did you notice anything odd about the bottle?" Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle. "Was it different this morning? The cap loose, maybe, or the liquid cloudy?" Sarah's hands tightened on the plate, and it slipped, splashing water on the counter. "No, ma'am," she said quickly. "It looked the same as always. I didn't open it or anything." Her eyes darted to the door, like she was afraid someone was listening. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "Of course, my dear, you're doing your best. But if you saw anyone near the kitchen, someone who shouldn't be there, you'd tell me, wouldn't you? It could help Mr. Langley." Sarah's face went paler, and she nodded, but she didn't say anything. That bruise on her wrist seemed to tell a story she wasn't ready to share. Miss Marple didn't push. Scared people shut down if you pressed too hard, and she wanted Sarah to trust her. She thanked her and stood, her cane tapping as she moved to the kitchen door. Outside, the garden was quiet, the roses glowing in the fading light. Mr. Finch was nowhere in sight, but Miss Marple saw his rake leaning against the shed. She thought of the vial she'd found there, labelled rat poison arsenic. It was still in her knitting bag, and she planned to show it to Dr. Haydock soon. But first, she wanted to know more about the tonic. If it was tampered with, someone had to have access to it, either in the kitchen, the vicarage, or the chemist's shop. She decided to visit Mr. Hodges at the chemist's shop. The walk was short, and the village was settling down for the evening, with lights flickering in cottage windows. The shop was small, with shelves packed with bottles, soaps, and powders. Mr. Hodges was behind the counter, his glasses slipping down his nose, his hands fidgeting with a pen. He looked nervous, even more than usual, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the way his fingers twitched when she walked in. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hodges," she said, smiling. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was wondering about Mr. Langley's tonic. You filled the prescription, didn't you?" Mr. Hodges nodded, pushing his glasses up. "Yes, Miss Marple. Dr. Baxter's nerve tonic, same as every week. I checked it myself, sealed and proper when it left my shop." His voice was high, and a bead of sweat glistened on his forehead. Miss Marple tilted her head, her smile warm, but her eyes sharp. "I'm sure you're very careful, Mr. Hodges, but did anyone ask about the tonic? Or come by the shop looking unusual?" Mr. Hodges hesitated, his pen tapping the counter. "Well, there was a man a few days ago," he said slowly. "Tall, in a dark coat. Said he was a salesman, wanted to sell me some new tonics. I told him no, but he hung around looking at the shelves. He asked about Dr. Baxter's tonic, said he'd heard it was popular. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think much of it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. The man in the dark coat, Harold, the cousin, kept turning up like a bad penny. "Did he touch anything?" she asked. "The bottles, maybe?" Mr. Hodges shook his head, but his eyes flicked to the back of the shop, where a curtain hid the storeroom. "Not that I saw. He left after a bit, but he was back the next day, just standing outside. Gave me the creeps, to be honest." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Harold had been at the vicarage, near the shed, and now at the chemist's shop. Was he the one who tampered with the tonic? Or was he working with someone else? Mr. Finch, maybe, or even Sarah. She thanked Mr. Hodges and bought a small bar of soap, her thoughts spinning as she stepped outside. The village was quiet now, the sun sinking behind the hills. Miss Marple walked slowly, her cane tapping, her knitting bag heavy with the vial from the shed. She thought of the cloudy tonic, the almond smell and Sarah's bruise. Arsenic wasn't hard to get. Rat poison was sold everywhere. But slipping it into a bottle took planning. Someone had been in the kitchen, or the shop, or both. She thought of Mr. Finch, with his vial and his nervous glances. She thought of Harold, arguing with Mr. Langley about money. And she thought of Sarah, scared and silent, her wrist marked by someone's grip. Back at the vicarage, she found Dr. Haydock in the parlour, talking to the vicar, Leonard. His face was grim, but he brightened when he saw Miss Marple. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he said. "I've got news. The hospital tested the tonic bottle. It's laced with arsenic, just as I thought. Not enough to kill outright, but enough to make him sick. Someone tampered with it, Miss Marple, and we need to find out who." Miss Marple nodded, her hand slipping into her knitting bag. "I found something you should see," she said, pulling out the handkerchief-wrapped vial. She handed it to Dr. Haydock, careful not to touch it. "This was in the shed, hidden in a box. It's rat poison, labelled arsenic." Dr. Haydock's eyes widened, and he took the vial carefully. "Good heavens! Miss Marple, this could be it, the source of the poison. I'll send it to the hospital for testing. But how did it get into the tonic?" "That's what we need to find out," Miss Marple said, her voice calm, but her mind sharp. She thought of Mr. Finch, always near the shed, and Sarah, who handled the tonic bottle every day. She thought of Harold, lurking at the shop and the vicarage. Someone had planned this, and they'd been careful, but not careful enough. The vicar shook his head, his face pale. "Poison in my house," he said. "It's unthinkable. Mr. Langley's such a good man. Why would anyone want to hurt him?" Miss Marple didn't answer, but her mind was working fast. Money was a common reason for poison, and Griselda had said Harold asked Mr. Langley for money. A cousin with a grudge could be dangerous, but why involve Mr. Finch? And what about Sarah's bruise? Was she a victim, or was she part of it? She stayed at the vicarage a bit longer, sipping tea with Griselda and the vicar. The house was quiet, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Miss Marple's eyes kept drifting to the window, where the garden lay in shadow. The shed was out there, hiding its secrets, and Mr. Finch was still working, his rake moving slowly in the dusk. As she walked home, the village was dark, with only a few lights in the cottages. The air was cool, and the stars were starting to peek out. Miss Marple's cane tapped softly, her knitting bag heavy at her side. The vial was gone, safe with Dr. Haydock, but the puzzle was still there. The tonic, the shed, the bruise, the cousin. Each piece fit somewhere, and she was getting closer to seeing the whole picture. She thought of her nephew's detective books, with their tales of poison and betrayal. People were the same everywhere. She knew, whether in a big city or a small village like St. Mary Mead. Someone wanted Mr. Langley dead, and they'd tried to make it look like an illness. But they hadn't counted on Miss Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet ways. She reached her cottage, the roses glowing in the moonlight. Inside, she lit the fire and poured a fresh cup of tea, her knitting needles clicking as she thought. The truth was out there, and she'd find it. She always did. Chapter 6. The Man in the Dark Coat. The evening air in St. Mary Mead was cool and crisp, with stars twinkling above the quiet village. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy parlour, the fire crackling softly, her knitting needles clicking as she worked on her pale blue scarf. But her mind was far from the yarn in her hands. The puzzle of Mr. Langley's poisoning was growing clearer, yet more tangled with every clue. The arsenic-laced tonic bottle, the vial of rat poison from the shed, Sarah's bruise, Mr. Finch's sneaky glances, and the mysterious man in the dark coat. They all swirled in her thoughts like leaves in a windstorm. She sipped her tea, the cup warm against her fingers, and let her sharp mind sort through the pieces. The day had been full of whispers. The village was buzzing with talk of poison, and every eye seemed to follow Miss Marple as she moved through the streets. She'd found the vial in the shed, labelled rat poison, arsenic, and handed it to Dr. Haydock for testing. The tonic bottle, cloudy and smelling of almonds, was confirmed to contain arsenic, enough to make Mr. Langley sick, but not enough to kill him outright. Someone had planned this carefully, and Miss Marple was sure the man in the dark coat, Harold, Mr. Langley's cousin, was a key piece of the puzzle. He'd been seen at the vicarage, near the shed, and at the chemist's shop, always lurking, always watching. Miss Marple set her tea down and stood, her cane tapping as she moved to the window. The village was dark now, the cottages glowing with soft light. She thought of Sarah, the maid, with her scared eyes and bruised wrist. She thought of Mr. Finch, the gardener, with his gruff voice and that bulge in his pocket. And she thought of Harold, who'd argued with Mr. Langley about money. Money was a powerful reason to hurt someone, and Miss Marple had seen it spark trouble before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond. She decided to visit the vicarage again, to ask more about Harold. The walk was short, her shawl wrapped tight against the evening chill. The streets were quiet, but she felt eyes on her. Maybe just the village's curiosity, or maybe something darker. At the vicarage, Griselda met her at the door, her face pale and her hands twisting her apron. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice shaky. "You're out late. Any news? Mr. Langley's still holding on, but Dr. Haydock says it's touch and go." Miss Marple patted her arm, her smile gentle but her eyes sharp. "We're getting closer, my dear. I was wondering about Mr. Langley's cousin, the man in the dark coat. You said his name was Harold. Can you tell me more about him?" Griselda led her to the parlour, where a fire burned low. The room smelled of wax polish and tea, and a tray of biscuits sat on the table. Griselda sat, her hands still twisting. "Harold's not a nice man," she said. "Mr. Langley told me a bit about him after he visited last week. They grew up together, but they're not close. Harold's always in trouble. Debts, bad deals, that sort of thing. He came asking for money, said he needed it to pay off a loan. Mr. Langley said no, and they argued in the study. I heard raised voices, but I didn't catch the words." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Did Harold come back after that, or was he seen around the vicarage?" Griselda frowned, thinking. "I saw him near the shed yesterday, like I told you. He didn't come to the door, just stood there looking at the house, then left. I thought he was a delivery man at first, but he seemed sneaky." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. Harold was everywhere, near the shed, at the chemist's shop, arguing with Mr. Langley. A cousin with a grudge could be dangerous, especially one who needed money. "Did Mr. Langley say anything about Harold's troubles?" she asked. "Debts, perhaps, or people he owed?" Griselda shook her head. "Not much. Just that Harold was always asking for help. But Mr. Langley was tired of bailing him out. He said Harold had mixed with some rough types, men from the city not like us here." Miss Marple's mind raced. Rough types could mean trouble, and trouble could mean poison. She thought of the vial in the shed, the cloudy tonic bottle, and Sarah's bruise. Was Harold working alone, or did he have help? Mr. Finch, with his rat poison, was a suspect, but so was Sarah, who handled the tonic every day. Miss Marple thanked Griselda and asked to see the kitchen again, hoping Sarah might let something slip. The kitchen was warm, with the smell of fresh bread and soap. Sarah was scrubbing a pot, her hands moving fast, her dark hair slipping from her cap. The bruise on her wrist was darker now, a purple mark that made Miss Marple's heart ache. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide and scared. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice small. "Is Mr. Langley better?" "He's fighting," Miss Marple said, sitting at the table. Her knitting needles clicked, a soothing sound that often made people talk. "Sarah, I was wondering about that man in the dark coat. Have you seen him around the vicarage? Near the kitchen, maybe, or the shed?" Sarah's hands froze, and the pot slipped, splashing water. "No, ma'am," she said quickly. "I don't know him. I just do my work. Scones, tea, the tonic bottle, that's all." Her voice was high, and her eyes darted to the door, like she was afraid someone was watching. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle. "You're a good girl, Sarah, but you seem worried. If someone scared you or hurt you, you can tell me. It might help Mr. Langley." Sarah's face went pale, and she shook her head. "I didn't see anything, honest. I just want Mr. Langley to be okay." Her fingers brushed the bruise, and she pulled her sleeve down, hiding it. Miss Marple saw fear in her eyes, not guilt, and that told her something. Someone had scared Sarah, maybe even grabbed her wrist. Was it Harold or Mr. Finch? Miss Marple didn't push. She thanked Sarah and stepped outside, her cane tapping the path. The garden was dark now, the roses just shadows in the moonlight. The shed loomed at the edge, its rusty lock glinting faintly. She thought of the vial she'd found there, labelled rat poison, arsenic. It was with Dr. Haydock now, but it pointed to Mr. Finch. Yet Harold's presence near the shed made her wonder. Were they working together? She needed to know more about Harold. She decided to visit the village shop, where Mrs. Carter might have seen him. The shop was closing, but Mrs. Carter was still there, stacking cans. Her face lit up when she saw Miss Marple. "You're out late," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Heard about Mr. Langley? They say it's arsenic, sure, as anything. I still think it's that gardener, Mr. Finch. Bought rat poison here, you know." Miss Marple nodded, her smile calm. "Yes, you told me. What about that man in the dark coat? You said he was in here, asking about cleaning supplies. Did he say anything else? Mrs. Carter frowned, thinking. Not much. He was tall, scruffy, wore a dark coat. Asked about tonics, too, like he was curious about what we sold. Said he was passing through, but he didn't look like a traveller. More like he was up to something. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Harold was poking around everywhere, the vicarage, the shed, the shop. Did he buy anything? She asked. No, Mrs. Carter said, just looked around, then left. But he was back the next day, standing outside watching the shop. Gave me the shivers. Miss Marple thanked her and bought a tin of tea, her mind spinning. Harold was no stranger to St. Mary Mead, not any more. He'd been seen too many times, always where he shouldn't be. She thought of the tonic bottle, tampered with arsenic, and Sarah's bruise. Was Harold the one who'd scared her? Or was Mr. Finch the link, with his vile and nervous glances? As she walked home, the village was silent, the stars bright overhead. Her cane tapped softly, her knitting bag heavy at her side. The puzzle was taking shape. Harold's money troubles, Mr. Finch's poison, Sarah's fear. But how did they fit? She thought of her nephew's detective books, where clues always led to a motive. Money was a strong motive, and Harold needed it badly. But why poison Mr. Langley slowly, with small doses? Was it to avoid suspicion, or was there more to it? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit the fire and poured a fresh cup of tea. The parlour was warm, the flames casting shadows on the walls. She sat, her knitting needles clicking, and thought. Harold was the key, she was sure, but he wasn't working alone. Mr. Finch's vial pointed to him, and Sarah's bruise suggested someone had threatened her. The tonic was the weapon, but who had slipped the arsenic inside? She needed to see Harold, to watch him, to catch him off guard. The next morning she returned to the vicarage. Dr. Haydock was there, his face grim. The vial you found matches the arsenic in the tonic, he said. It's rat poison, all right. Mr. Langley's getting better, but he's not safe yet. We need to find who did this, Miss Marple. She nodded, her mind sharp. I have an idea, she said. Let's spread a rumour that Mr. Langley's recovering and remembers something about his illness. If the culprit thinks he might talk, they'll make a move. Dr. Haydock raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Risky, but smart. I'll tell the vicar to spread the word. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gleaming. People always slip up when they're scared, she said. She left the vicarage, her cane tapping, and headed to the village. She stopped at the post office, dropping a hint to Mrs. Weatherby that Mr. Langley was improving and had seen something odd the night before he got sick. By noon, the rumour was everywhere, buzzing through the village like bees. That evening, Miss Marple hid in the vicarage garden, her shawl wrapped tight, her knitting needles silent in her bag. The roses were dark shapes in the moonlight, and she'd loomed nearby. She crouched behind a bush, her heart steady despite the chill. She'd asked Constable Reed to wait nearby, just in case. The trap was set, and she waited, her eyes sharp. Soon, a figure crept into the garden, moving quietly. It was Mr. Finch, his cap low, his hands in his pockets. Another figure joined him, the man in the dark coat, tall and scruffy. Harold. They whispered, their voices low but urgent. You said the tonic would finish him, Harold hissed. If he talks, we're done for. Miss Marple's heart raced. She signalled Constable Reed, who stepped out, his flashlight bright. "Stay where you are," he called. The men froze, then tried to run, but Reed was faster, grabbing them both. Miss Marple stood, her cane steady, her smile calm. The trap had worked. Harold and Mr. Finch were caught, and the truth was close. She thought of Sarah's bruise, the vial, the tonic. The puzzle wasn't solved yet, but the pieces were falling into place. She followed Reed to the village hall, her mind already working on what came next. Chapter 7. The trap is set. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a silvery glow across the quiet village. The air was cool, with a hint of damp earth and roses, and the streets were silent, save for the soft hoot of an owl. Miss Jane Marple stood in the vicarage garden, hidden behind a thick rose bush, her shawl wrapped tight against the night's chill. Her knitting needles were still in her bag, her hands steady despite the excitement bubbling in her chest. She'd set a trap, and now she waited, her sharp eyes fixed on the dark path leading to the vicarage. The puzzle of Mr. Langley's poisoning was close to being solved, and tonight, she hoped, the culprits would show themselves. The day had been busy. Miss Marple had spent it piecing together clues. The arsenic-laced tonic bottle, the vial of rat poison from the shed, Sarah's bruise, Mr. Finch's nervous glances, and the man in the dark coat, Harold, Mr. Langley's cousin. The village was buzzing with gossip, each whisper pointing to poison and danger. Dr. Haydock had confirmed the tonic contained arsenic, matching the rat poison she'd found in the shed. Sarah, the maid, was scared, her wrist marked by a bruise that told a story of fear. Mr. Finch, the gardener, was hiding something, his pocket bulging with a vial like the one in the shed, and Harold, with his money troubles and sneaky ways, was everywhere. Near the shed, at the chemist's shop, arguing with Mr. Langley. Miss Marple knew she was close to the truth, but she needed proof. That morning she devised a plan with Dr. Haydock and the vicar, Leonard. "Spread a rumour," she'd said, her voice calm, but her eyes bright. "Tell everyone Mr. Langley's getting better, and remembers something about his illness. If the culprit thinks he might talk, they'll panic and make a move." Dr. Haydock had nodded, his face grim but trusting her instincts. The vicar had agreed, and by noon the rumour was everywhere, whispered in the post office, the bakery, and the village shop. "Mr. Langley's awake," people said. "He saw something odd before he got sick." Now, as the clock struck 10, Miss Marple waited in the garden. She'd asked Constable Reed, a sturdy young man with a quick step, to hide nearby, ready to act. The vicarage loomed behind her, its windows dark except for a faint glow in Mr. Langley's room. The roses around her were shadowy shapes, their petals catching the moonlight. The shed, where she'd found the vial, stood at the garden's edge, its rusty lock glinting faintly. She felt a thrill, not of fear but of certainty. People always slipped up when they were scared, and she was counting on it. Her heart quickened as she heard a rustle in the bushes. A figure crept into the garden, moving quietly, their steps muffled on the grass. It was Mr. Finch, his cap pulled low, his hands in his pockets. He paused, looking toward the vicarage, his shoulders hunched. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. That bulge in his pocket was still there, small and hard, like the vial she'd found. She held her breath, her cane steady in her hand. Another figure joined him, taller, with a long dark coat that blended into the shadows. Harold. Miss Marple's pulse raced, but her face stayed calm, hidden behind the bush. The men stood close, their voices low, urgent. "You said the tonic would finish him!" Harold hissed, his words sharp in the quiet night. "Now they're saying he's awake and talking. If he names us, we're done for." Mr. Finch muttered something, his voice too low to catch, but his hands moved nervously, one slipping into his pocket. Miss Marple's mind raced. They were scared, just as she'd hoped. The rumour had worked, drawing them out like moths to a flame. She glanced toward the hedge where Constable Reed was hiding, her signal ready. A soft tap of her cane on the A ground. Harold stepped closer to Mr. Finch, his voice a harsh whisper. "We need to get that bottle. If they test it again, they'll know it's arsenic. You were supposed to make sure it was enough to end him, not just make him sick." Mr. Finch shook his head, his voice gruff. "I did what you paid me for, slipped it in when the maid wasn't looking. It's not my fault he's still breathing." Miss Marple's heart thumped. So Mr. Finch had tampered with the tonic, and Harold was behind it. But why? Money, she guessed, remembering Griselda's story of Harold's debts and their argument. She tapped her cane once, softly. The signal for Constable Reed. A rustle came from the hedge, and the men froze, their heads turning toward the sound. "Who's there?" Harold snapped, his hand reaching into his coat. Miss Marple held her breath, her body still. She was no match for two men, but she trusted Reed. A moment later, the constable stepped out, his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Stay where you are!" he shouted, his voice firm. "Hands up, both of you!" Harold cursed and bolted toward the shed, but Reed was faster, his boots pounding the grass. Mr. Finch hesitated, then raised his hands, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. Reed tackled Harold to the ground, pinning him with a strong grip. "You're not going anywhere," Reed said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. He looked toward Miss Marple, who stepped out from behind the bush, her shawl tight around her shoulders. "Well done, Constable," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes gleaming. "I think these gentlemen have some explaining to do." Reed hauled Harold and Mr. Finch to their feet, keeping a firm grip on both. Harold struggled, his dark coat flapping, but Reed was too strong. Mr. Finch stood still, his head down, his hands shaking. Miss Marple looked at them, her mind piecing together the final clues. The vial, the tonic, Sarah's bruise. It was all falling into place, but she needed to hear it from them. "Let's take them to the village hall," she said. "Dr. Haydock and the vicar should be there, and we'll get to the bottom of this." The village hall was a short walk, its stone walls glowing in the moonlight. Inside it was warm, with a long table and chairs set up for meetings. Dr. Haydock and the vicar were waiting, their faces tense. Griselda was there too, her hands twisting her apron, her eyes wide with worry. Constable Reed pushed Harold and Mr. Finch into chairs, standing guard with his arms crossed. Miss Marple sat across from the men, her knitting bag at her side, her cane resting against the table. "Now," she said, her voice soft but firm, "let's hear the truth. Mr. Langley was poisoned with arsenic, and you two know something about it. Why don't you start talking?" Harold glared at her, his eyes hard. "You've got nothing on us, old lady," he spat. "Just rumours and guesses." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly. "Oh, I think we have more than that. Constable, would you check Mr. Finch's pocket? I believe he's carrying a vial, much like the one I found in the shed." Stepped forward, and Mr. Finch flinched, his hand moving to his pocket. Reed was quicker, pulling out a small glass vial, identical to the one Miss Marple had found. It was labelled rat poison, arsenic, and it was half full. Dr. Haydock took it, his face grim. "This matches the poison in the tonic," he said. "No doubt about it." Harold's face paled, but he kept his mouth shut. Mr. Finch slumped in his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle but sharp. "Mr. Finch, you said you slipped something into the tonic. Why? And who paid you?" Mr. Finch's hands shook, and he glanced at Harold, who shot him a warning look. But the gardener's nerve was gone. "It was him," he muttered, pointing at Harold. "He came to me last week, said he'd pay off my debts if I helped him, said Mr. Langley was in the way, that he'd get money if the curate was gone. I didn't want to kill him, just make him sick. I put a little arsenic in the tonic, not enough to, you know." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on Harold. "And you, Harold, why did you want your cousin out of the way?" Harold's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Miss Marple continued, her voice calm. "Griselda told me you argued with Mr. Langley about money. Were you hoping to inherit something? Or was it revenge for him saying no?" Harold's eyes flashed, but he stayed silent. Miss Marple turned to Mr. Finch. "And Sarah, did you see her bruise? Did someone hurt her to keep her quiet?" Mr. Finch's head snapped up, his face guilty. "That was him," he said, pointing at Harold again. "She overheard us talking in the garden about the poison. He grabbed her, told her to keep her mouth shut or she'd be sorry. I didn't touch her, I swear." Griselda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Poor Sarah. That's why she's been so scared." Miss Marple nodded, her mind clear. The puzzle was almost complete. Harold had a motive. Money, likely an inheritance, tied to Mr. Langley's death. Mr. Finch was his tool, desperate for cash to pay his debts. Sarah was caught in the middle, scared into silence by Harold's threats. The tonic was the weapon, laced with arsenic from the vial in the shed. But there was one last piece. Why Mr. Langley? What did Harold gain? She turned to Constable Reed. "Keep them here," she said. "I need to speak with Sarah. She might know more than she's said." They found Sarah in the vicarage kitchen, washing dishes in the dim light. Her hands shook, and her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. Miss Marple sat at the table, her voice gentle. "Sarah, my dear, it's all right now. Mr. Finch and Harold are caught. They can't hurt you. Did Harold grab your wrist? Did he threaten you?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "He caught me in the garden," she whispered. "I heard him talking to Mr. Finch about the tonic, about making Mr. Langley sick. I tried to run, but he grabbed me, said he'd hurt me if I told anyone. I was so scared, Miss Marple." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch warm. "You're safe now, my dear. You did nothing wrong. Did you see them touch the tonic bottle?" Sarah nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw Mr. Finch in the kitchen one morning early, before anyone was up. He was by the shelf where we keep the tonic. I thought he was just getting water, but now I think he was putting something in it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Thank you, Sarah. You've been very brave." She stood, her cane tapping, and returned to the village hall. The pieces were in place now. Harold's motive, Mr. Finch's actions, Sarah's fear. The trap had worked, and the truth was out. She faced Harold and Mr. Finch, her voice steady. "Harold, you wanted Mr. Langley gone for money. You paid Mr. Finch to poison the tonic, and you threatened Sarah to keep her quiet. But you didn't count on Mr. Langley surviving, or on someone noticing the clues." Harold's face twisted, but he didn't deny it. Mr. Finch hung his head, his hands shaking. Constable Reed tightened the handcuffs, ready to take them to the police station in Much Benham. Dr. Haydock shook his head, amazed. "Miss Marple, you're a wonder," he said. "You saved a life tonight." Miss Marple smiled, her knitting bag at her side. "People always leave traces," she said. "You just have to look." As she walked home, the village was quiet, the stars bright overhead. The puzzle wasn't fully solved. Harold's exact motive was still unclear, but the danger was over. Mr. Langley would recover, and St. Mary Mead would be safe again. For now. Chapter 8. The truth revealed. The morning sun rose over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. The cottages, with their straw roofs and tidy gardens, looked peaceful again, as if the dark cloud of poison had lifted. Miss Jane Marple sat in the village hall, her knitting needles clicking softly, her shawl draped over her shoulders. The room was warm, with sunlight streaming through the windows, and a table held a pot of tea and a plate of biscuits. Across from her sat Constable Reed, Dr. Haydock, the vicar, Leonard, and Griselda, all waiting to hear the full story. Harold, the man in the dark coat, and Mr. Finch, the gardener, were in chairs, their hands cuffed, their faces pale. Miss Marple's trap the night before had caught them, and now it was time to lay out the truth. The village had been buzzing since the arrests. Gossip flew from the post office to the bakery, each whisper wilder than the last. "Poison!" people said, caught in the act, but Miss Marple knew the truth was simpler and uglier than the rumours. She'd pieced it together. The arsenic-laced tonic, the vial in the shed, Sarah's bruise, and the sneaky glances of Mr. Finch. Her sharp eyes and quick thinking had saved Mr. Langley's life, and now she would explain how it all fit together. She sipped her tea, her voice calm but firm. "It's a sad business," she said, looking around the room. "But people are the same everywhere, in big cities or small villages like ours. Greed and fear make them do terrible things. Let me tell you what happened." Everyone leaned forward, even Harold and Mr. Finch, though their eyes were hard. Miss Marple's needles clicked, a steady rhythm that kept her thoughts clear. "It started with Mr. Langley, our new curate," she said. "A kind man, quiet, but with a sharp mind. He came to St. Mary Mead a month ago, and no one thought he'd cause trouble. But someone saw him as a problem. His cousin, Harold." She looked at Harold, whose jaw tightened but stayed silent. "Griselda told me Harold visited last week, asking for money," she continued. "Mr. Langley said no, and they argued. But it wasn't just about a loan. Harold stood to inherit a fortune if Mr. Langley died." An old family will, wasn't it, Harold? Left by your uncle, who favoured Mr. Langley, but named you as the next in line." Harold's eyes flashed, but he didn't speak. Miss Marple went on. Harold had debts, bad ones, from deals gone wrong in the city. He needed money fast, and Mr. Langley was in the way. So he came to St. Mary Mead, not just to ask for help, but to make a plan. She turned to Mr. Finch, who slumped in his chair, his hands shaking. "That's where you come in, Mr. Finch," she said. "You're new here too, and in trouble of your own. Debts, I believe, from gambling. Harold found you, didn't he? Offered to pay them off if you helped him." Mr. Finch's head dropped lower, his voice a mumble. "He said it was easy money," he admitted. "Just make the curate sick, not kill him. I didn't want to hurt anyone." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "You bought rat poison at the village shop. Arsenic, easy to get and easy to hide. You slipped it into Mr. Langley's tonic bottle early in the morning when Sarah wasn't looking. The bottle was kept in the kitchen, wasn't it? On the shelf by the door, where anyone could reach it." Griselda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The kitchen? I never thought. Sarah brought the bottle up every day." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Sarah's not to blame," she said. "She was caught in the middle. You see, she overheard Harold and Mr. Finch talking in the garden about the poison. She tried to run, but Harold grabbed her, didn't he? Left that bruise on her wrist and told her to keep quiet, or she'd be sorry." Sarah, standing by the door, nodded, her eyes red with tears. "I was so scared," she whispered. "He said he'd hurt me if I told. I didn't know what to do." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch gentle. "You're a brave girl, Sarah. You helped us more than you know." She turned back to the room, her voice steady. "Harold planned it all. He came to the vicarage, arguing with Mr. Langley to make it look like a family spat. He went to the chemist's shop, asking Mr. Hodges about tonics, checking how the prescriptions worked, and he watched the shed where Mr. Finch hid the poison. He thought he was clever, but he wasn't careful enough." Dr. Haydock shook his head, amazed. "How did you figure it out, Miss Marple? It's like you saw everything." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "I just watch people," she said. "They always leave clues, even when they don't mean to. The tonic bottle was cloudy, not clear like it should be. It smelled of almonds, a sign of arsenic. Sarah's bruise told me someone scared her. And Mr. Finch's pocket held a vial, just like the one I found in the shed. It all pointed to a plan, and Harold was at the centre." The vicar, Leonard, looked pale. "But why not kill him outright? Why make him sick?" Miss Marple's eyes were sharp. "A slow poison looks like illness," she said. "If Mr. Langley died bit by bit, no one would suspect murder, not in St. Mary Mead. Harold wanted it to seem natural, so he could claim the inheritance without questions. But he didn't count on Dr. Haydock's skill, or Sarah's courage, or a nosy old lady who notices things." Constable Reed chuckled, his arms crossed. "You're more than nosy, Miss Marple. You're a wonder." Harold finally spoke, his voice bitter. "You've got no proof," he said. "Just stories and an old lady's guesses." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver. "Oh, I think we have a proof. The vial from the shed, the arsenic in the tonic, Sarah's story, and your own words last night, heard in the garden. You said, 'If he talks, we're done for.' That's enough for the police in Much Benham, I'm sure." Harold's face went grey, and Mr. Finch slumped further, his hands shaking. Constable Reed nodded. "They'll be charged with attempted murder," he said. "Thanks to you, Miss Marple, Mr. Langley's safe." Dr. Haydock stood, his face relieved. "He's getting better," he said. "The hospital's treatment is working. He'll be back to his sermons in no time." Griselda wiped her eyes, her smile shaky but real. "Oh, Miss Marple, you saved him. How can we thank you?" Miss Marple set her knitting down, her eyes warm. "No need, my dear. I just did what anyone would, watching and listening. Now, let's have some tea. It's been a long night." The room filled with soft laughter, the tension breaking like a wave. Constable Reed took Harold and Mr. Finch to the police station, their heads low, their plan undone. Sarah sat with Griselda, her tears drying as she sipped tea. The vicar shook Miss Marple's hand, his voice full of gratitude. "You're a blessing to this village," he said. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking again. She didn't need thanks. She needed the truth, and she'd found it. As she walked home, the village was waking up, the sun climbing higher. The post office was open, Mrs. Weatherby already spreading the news of the arrests. The bakery smelled of fresh scones, and Mrs. Price waved as Miss Marple passed. Even Tommy Pierce, pedalling his bicycle, grinned at her, his cap back on straight. Her cottage welcomed her with the scent of roses and the warmth of her parlour. She lit the fire, poured a fresh cup of tea, and sat in her armchair, her knitting in her lap. The puzzle was solved. Harold's greed, Mr. Finch's weakness, Sarah's fear, all laid bare. Mr. Langley would recover, and St. Mary Mead would return to its quiet ways. But Miss Marple knew it wouldn't stay quiet forever. People were people, and secrets always found their way out. She thought of her nephew's detective books, with their tales of crime and cleverness. "People are much the same everywhere," she said to herself, her needles clicking. "And a little watching goes a long way." The fire crackled, the tea steamed, and Miss Marple smiled. Another mystery solved, another life saved. It was just another day in St. Mary Mead.